Hey there Python pioneers, and welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to be learning about Python dictionaries. So far in our past videos, we've learned about Python lists and tuples. Lists, if you remember, are ordered collections of items that you can change. You can access the items with their index, which starts at 0. So for example, at the top we have cat names as a list. And if you wanted to access the first item in the list, you would just index in and use index 0. So cat names square bracket 0 square bracket would output Sam. With tuples, we have an ordered collection of items that is unchangeable or immutable. So immutable is unchangeable and mutable is changeable. So lists are mutable and tuples are immutable, right? And just like a list, you can access the items with their index. So one of the main reasons maybe why you want to use a tuple would be if you have a list of, maybe list isn't the right word, but you have a series of items and their order is important. So for example, if you wanted to represent the X, Y, and Z coordinates of something, well, a tuple is a good use for that if you don't want the data to be unchangeable and their order is important, or if you do want the data to be unchangeable. So X, Y, Z, for example, as a tuple. So dictionaries, right? That's what we really want to talk about today. So dictionaries are unordered collections that are changeable. But instead of using an index like you do with tuples and lists, you use a key. And the key can be many different data types. So that's actually really powerful because the key can have a semantically meaningful value that allows you to have this powerful lookup ability where all you need to know is the key you want. You don't need to know where it is in the dictionary, and simply using that key gives you the value. So for example, and we're going to dive into exactly how dictionaries are defined and everything, but just to get started, I want to show you what a dictionary looks like. So instead of, we have parentheses for a tuple, square brackets for a list, now we use curly braces. So a curly brace signifies that you're defining a dictionary, and dictionaries have keys and values. So the key is always first, and it doesn't have to be a string, right? It could be an integer or a tuple. It could be many different things actually. And after the key, you have a colon and the value that corresponds to that key. So my cat is the dictionary name. The size here is a key, and the value that's stored at that key or with that key is fat. So, for example, if we wanted to reference in and get the value stored under the size key, we just use square brackets, just like we did with tuples and lists, but instead of supplying a index, we supply the key value, which is, or the value of the key. Key and value, got to be careful how we use those words when we're talking about dictionaries. But so my cat, and then I pass in size, would output fat. Okay, so I just want to show you why dictionaries are nice to have, and then we're going to dive into deeply how they work. So here's a cool example. Let's say if we combine dictionaries with tuples, this can actually be pretty powerful. So let's say we have a tuple that we use to represent today's date, where we have the month, day, and year separated inside of the tuple, right? And here's a good example also of why we would want to use a tuple, because month, day, and year is a specific order that we want our numbers to be in. So we use the tuple, and that tuple just has month, day, and year separated. And we can use the tuple value as a whole, like all the values in the tuple together, as a key in the dictionary, which is pretty cool. So just as an example, I defined a short dictionary with 3 entries or 3 items, and we have 3 different keys that are, actually let me change this one. So we have 3 different keys, and they're just the date: 2/17/2024, 2/18/2024, 2/19/2024. And corresponding to each key is a value, the weather, the high of the day. So if I pass in a date as the key to look up a value, I can get the high temperature for that day. And that's all stored in the dictionary, which is kind of cool. So for example, I already have defined today's date as month, day, year. I have my weather dictionary that stores those values. And if I wanted to look up the high for a day, all I do is type out weather, the name of the dictionary, square brackets, and I can actually pass in that variable that holds the tuple value, and it will look up, where do I see 2/18/24? I see a high of 26. So if we run that, it prints high of 26. Pretty neat. Okay, so let's jump over and let's just start from the beginning and look at how do we define dictionaries and work with them. Okay, so curly braces, right? Just like I said before, that would define, if you put nothing inside of the curly braces, you're defining an empty dictionary. So you're starting off, now you have a dictionary, just has nothing in it. So if you wanted to go ahead and define some items in the dictionary, then you just add those items in. And each item is separated by a comma. So this is an item, Jason : 85. And remember, the first value, I'm trying to think of a different word other than value, but the first item or the first object you see here is the key, and the second is the value. So key, value, key, value, key, value. Okay? And so we're using a dictionary here to store grades, and we're using the name of someone as a key, which is really helpful, right? Because think about if you had a list. How would you accomplish this with a list? How would you accomplish storing someone's grade and keeping it all straight of, okay, well, Jason's is index 0 and Sam's is index 1, Casey's is index 2. You have to have 2 separate lists. It would just be a mess, honestly. It would be much harder to do. You could do it, but dictionaries provide a really helpful tool here, because I can look up what was Sam's grade just by using the square brackets, right? And passing in Sam as the key, and it will just print out 95. So just like with lists, we have methods that you can run on a dictionary. And if you don't remember, methods are just functions that you have to call on a value. So for example, we have the keys method that returns a list-like object containing all of the keys. So it's just going to tell us all the keys that are in the grades dictionary. And it's a method, so in order to call it, I have to type out a dictionary variable and then type out the period and the keys function. So then we're able to use that function. And I'm going to print it out here in a second, and you'll see what it prints out. Values does exactly what you think it would. It prints out all of the values in the dictionary. Not the keys, just the values. And then items returns a list-like object containing all of the items, so the key and value, and each key and value is returned as a tuple. So that's pretty neat. Okay. And there's a cool assignment trick you can do with for loops. So if you're iterating through and you want to use like a for loop on a dictionary, you could use the items method. You know that each item is returned as a tuple. So normally with a list, right, you could just say for value in list, the list name, and you would iterate through, and list would represent the current item in the list. Well, if you have a tuple, you can't just provide one value, right? Because this tuple has a key and a value, so it has two different things in it. So all you have to do is use a comma. And I'm using the variable key and the variable value, but we could very easily, since we know this is grades, we could say, for name and grade in grades, and then just down here, just change the variable I was using. And that would work. So let's run that real quick so we can get an idea of what it would look like. So if we run this, testing the keys method, and it prints out this, dictionary keys, and then it just prints out the names, Jason, Sam, Casey, Marlon. Testing the values method, it just prints out the values. Testing the items method. So this is where we're printing out those tuple. There's a tuple representing key and value for my name and my grade. Another tuple. Another tuple. So you see these are actually all the key value pairs in the dictionary. So just like when we were running that for loop and we have the key and the value in grade.items, you can see that name is getting the value Jason and grade is getting the value 85, and I can actually just use that in a for loop now. That's why that's useful, because now I can just use print, name had grade, and we're just using the formatted string to access those variable values inside of the curly braces. And so I can print out Jason had a grade of 85, Sam had a grade of 95. Kind of useful, kind of nice. Okay, and also let's keep going down. I have some more stuff. What if you want to check if a key or value exists? So that can actually be done very easily. So let me comment this stuff out up here so it's not printing out, and we'll keep working through. Okay. So we have our grades dictionary again. And if I just run this code, I also want to show you something nice that we really haven't done in the interactive terminal. Since I ran this script, it has defined the grades dictionary. So I can actually play around with it in the interactive terminal now and use it. So for example, Jason in grades.keys. This allows me to check and see, is the value Jason a key in the grades dictionary? So if I run that, it will return true because we see that Jason is a key. I can also check, maybe I want to know, did anybody make 100? I can check, is 100 a value in grades.values? We also know that's true because Marilyn made a 100. I can also use the not keyword to check if something is not in a dictionary. So Greg, we don't see as a key. So if I say Greg not in grades.keys, it should return true. And you could change any of these. I could check, is Greg in grade set keys? We know that will be false. So these are useful for if you wanted to use them in a conditional statement. Maybe if Greg is not in grades.keys, then you want to do something. Also, something nice to know, only for keys at least, you don't actually have to use .keys. So I can just ask, in a conditional statement, is Jason in grades? And it checks the keys. It doesn't do that for values. You can't, if you want to check a value, you do have to say grades.values. But for keys, you can just simply check with in. So, Greg in grades, false. So really helpful for conditional statements like if, or maybe a while loop or for loop, or not for loop, but while loop, if, elif, else, those kinds of things. What happens when you attempt to access a key? So let's just run this again, clear that up. If I try to access a key that doesn't exist, so if I say grades at Superman, and I'm not trying to assign a value, I'm just trying to get the value, I get an error, and it says key error, Superman. So that just simply means if you ever see key error when you're working with a dictionary, that means that, hey, this key doesn't exist, so I couldn't get anything. While we're looking at that, maybe you want to set a value on a key. You actually can just, let me clear that again so you don't have to look at the error. So if I type out grades Superman, the cool thing about dictionaries is you can access, and just like with lists, you can change or set. But with a dictionary, if you try to set a key that doesn't exist, it will create that key and the value and add that into the dictionary. So lists don't work that way, right? If you have a list with 3 items and you try to access the 4th item and set a value there, you get an error, right? Out of range, because you can't just go set a new value. You have to append a new value, right? But with grades at Superman, we know it doesn't exist because all we have right now in our grades dictionary are these values. I can set it equal to, let's say he got 100. Now if I print out the grades dictionary, I see that Superman is a key and a value now. So that's super cool. But like I was saying, if you had a list and let's say grades has 3 items in it and it's a list, I'll just say grades list just so you don't get confused, and it has 3 items, so that would be indexed 0, 1, and 2. If I try to set something at the 3rd index, I'll just do this real quick so you can see the difference. Let's see, 90, 100, 87. Okay, so grades list at 3 equals 100. Oh, let me run that code again. Grades list at 3 equals 100, and we get an index error. List assignment index out of range, right? Because you can't do that, because 3 would be the next item. It would be this item here, but we don't have that item, so you can't do that with lists. You have to use .append. But dictionaries don't have to worry about that. So kind of nice. But let's look at a couple other ways you could do that might be a little better. Because the problem you might have, right, with doing it that way, just assigning a value, what if there's already a value there? What if you only want to set a value when there isn't a value already there? So there's a way to do that. Or what about even just getting the value? If there isn't a value there, you want to at least return a default value. So let's look at a couple of those options. Let me run that again. So if a key doesn't exist and you want to use it, you can use this get method, and it's super nice. So we have two prints here. One that goes and uses grades to get the key JSON. We want to get that value. And if there is no value, we want to return 0. We know if you scroll up, Jason is in the dictionary and has a grade of 85. Greg, on the other hand, we do not see, right? So we also have a print line that gets the grade for Greg. And we just use get the value of the key Greg. If you don't find anything, just use 0. So if we run that code, we can see that Jason has a grade of 85, so it got my grade. But Greg doesn't have one, so it returns 0. Pretty useful, and can prevent that key error that we saw. So if you try to access a key that doesn't exist, like Superman, you're able to use this get method to say, hey, if it doesn't exist, just use the default value 0. Very helpful. Okay, let's turn off those. And like I said, if you want to set a default value when a key doesn't exist, there's two ways to do this. One way is harder than the other. One way is to use an if conditional statement that says, hey, if Greg is not in grades, so it's not a key in grades, let's set it as a value and just say, hey, grades at the Greg key equals 0. That works. There's actually nothing wrong with that code. It works perfectly fine. But you can also use the set default method on dictionaries. So, and this is actually pretty useful. So you can say, I was making sure I had that example down there. So you can say grades.setDefault Greg 0. And it does exactly the same thing as this if statement. So if Greg is not a key in grades, then set Greg equal to 0 in the dictionary. So if Greg already exists as a key, it's not going to change the value. Now let's look at how we might use that. So we're going to use set default to get dictionary values and set a default if one doesn't exist. Like, oh, it gets and sets. That's nice. So let's say we have a list of students. We have Peter and Jason, right? And this is later on in our program. We have a dictionary that already exists, but now we have this list of students that we need to print their grades. So maybe we're just like, I know you have a dictionary that has 100 students in it, but I have this sub list of, just Peter and Jason. I just want their grades. So I loop through that list with, using a standard thing like we talked about, where for, each student, and that's just a variable, in the student's list, we want to get their grade. Okay, what if that student doesn't exist though? I could use the get method, but also, I really want to update my grades dictionary, so these students should have a grade. And if they don't, I just want to set it to 0. So instead of using the get method and then having to say like, okay, if they don't exist, then set them to 0 and then set the grade variable to 0 as well. So just like up here, I have to say Greg's grade is 0. Well, I also need this variable here because I'm going to use it later. So I'd have to set it in the dictionary, set it here. It's just all this extra work. All I have to do, though, instead of all that extra work, is use the set default method. And if I say grades.setDefault for this student, each student in the list I'm going to do this for, and 0, I'm saying, hey, go look for Peter. He's the first one. So go look for Peter. Is he in the dictionary? No. Okay. Set his value, set the key Peter in the dictionary with a value of 0. And here's the cool part, return the value. So I can assign this little bit of code to a variable. And this grade variable will be set to basically whatever happens here. So if I set a default to 0, then I'm going to get that in the grade variable. But what happens when you have a key that already exists, like JSON? Then set default will run. It'll see that I don't need to have my default set because I already have a value, and it will return the value that I already have set. So in doing this, I'm able to get the value for anyone that already exists in the dictionary, and I'm also able to set the value for anyone that's not. So if we run this code, we'll see that Peter had a grade of 0 and Jason had a grade of 85. So just real quick, if we scroll up and look just to see, Jason is here and has a grade of 85. Peter is not in this dictionary. So let's run this code and see what it does. Peter had a grade of 0, Jason had a grade of 85. If I print out the grades dictionary, we see that Peter was added into the dictionary with that set default method. So very cool. That's really helpful when you need it. So comment that out. And just like lists and tuples, you can nest dictionaries. So this is the last little piece I wanted to show you for dictionaries. And it's good to know. So just like with lists, you could nest them or have a list within a list, right? You can have a dictionary within a dictionary. You're like, why would I want to do that? So here's an example. We've been looking at a dictionary called grades. Well, what if we have a dictionary for each assignment that represents the person and the grade they got, and we want to have another dictionary that holds all of those other dictionaries? So assignment 1 is the key, and grades 1 is a dictionary of all the grades the students got for assignment 1. So Jason got an 85, right, on assignment 1. And Jason got a 93 on assignment 2. Really, really helpful. And to index into that, and it's not really indexing, but to get values out of that dictionary, because it's nested, the way it works is you list out the first dictionary's name, the main dictionary, assignments. You use the square brackets to indicate what key you're trying to look at. And if we just take this part off first, you can see what happens. So if I just say print assignment 1, the value that's stored at assignment 1 in the dictionary, we know it's the grades 1 dictionary. And that's what it prints out. It just literally prints out this dictionary. So you could think of it as when this code runs, we now basically have, it's the same thing as typing out grades 1. So if you want to access a value in grades 1, what do? Well, you just type out square brackets and the key you want to access. So when you have a nested dictionary like this, you just add another set of square brackets to reference into the next dictionary. So if I wanted to get my grade on assignment 1, well, I type assignment 1 as the key. That returns the grades 1 dictionary. And then I just type in the key Jason to get my grade from assignment 1. And if I print that, you'll see that it prints 85. Pretty cool. Also, sometimes, don't worry if that doesn't immediately stick. Thinking about nested or multi-dimensional lists or dictionaries, it can be a little confusing, so don't worry about it. You'll figure it out eventually. Just keep practicing it and you'll get it. So sometimes when you're working with a nested dictionary, or list, but especially nested dictionaries like this, it doesn't. You need a way to print it out nicely. Sometimes when you print with the normal print, it doesn't print out very nice. So there's this library called pprint. It stands for pretty print. And if you just type out from pprint, import pprint, then you can use pprint. And it just prints it out a little nicer. So if we run this code, you can see what that looks like. You can see that, when a normal print, it just kind of throws everything on one line until you get to the end and wraps it around. Not super easy to read. And then with pretty print, it just prints it out a little nicer. So you see here's the first key, and here's the first value, which is another dictionary. Here's the second key, and here's the value, which is another dictionary. Remember, these are not ordered, so don't think of them as ordered. Technically speaking, after Python 3.7, dictionaries are stored in the order that you place them in, but don't rely on that because in previous versions of Python, printing it like this, even though I defined it and I defined assignment 1 first, technically speaking, when you print, you could get assignment 2 first. Just a weird thing. Don't, for some reason, if you try to think about them as being ordered, they're not. So don't depend on that for some reason. You should be using the keys as a way to get values out of dictionaries, not their order. So that's a good thing. So for example, if you were depending on the order that you inserted things into the dictionary so you could print it out, so maybe you sorted it, and then before you inserted it into the dictionary, you sorted it, and then you insert it in, and you're like, okay, well, I inserted values in a dictionary in order, so when I print them, they should be in order. That's what I'm talking about. After Python 3.7, they would be in order when you print. Before Python 3.7, they could be in any random order. So also, read the book on that. You really should take a break here, read chapter 5 and Automate the Boring Stuff, and just go through the examples there. It's super helpful. They have a lot of great content in there that talks about dictionaries and breaks down some of the things we talked about today. That covers pretty much everything we need to know about dictionaries. Really nice data structure. Can be really helpful for storing data and getting values out without having to sort through and look for something. If you know the key, you can just pop in there and get the value. So yeah, that's Python dictionaries. Hope you enjoyed it and look forward to seeing you in the next video.